Peter was relieved to lay down in the comfort of his bed, in the comfort of his home in Santa Maria, alive and well again. He had just gotten home from the hospital after 2 days. It all started about 3 days ago when Peter and a few of his friends had gone cliff jumping in Mataliha Creek in Ojai, California. However, things didn't go as planned when Peter slipped off the cliff and fell into the creek. Luckily, the impact to the water saved his life, but he had still gotten quite a few injuries to his head and fallen unconscious. Peter would never forget how fortunate he was to have friends who jumped in after and brought him out. They took him immediately to the nearby hospital where he was admitted. But that wasn't where the story ended. The experience he had at the hospital was one he would share again and again. "Mr. Peter Wright, I'm Dorothy Sanders. I'll be your nurse during your stay." Peter tried to sit up. His head hurt tremendously. "How long do you think I'll have to stay?" "Perhaps just a few days. You've had a severe concussion, and you need to be under supervision." Peter sighed as he laid down again. "Okay. The doctor will be here in the morning. It's almost 9, so you might want to go to bed. I've checked your temperature and your BP, so I won't disturb you until dawn. Sleep well, Mr. Wright." "Thank you." Dorothy turned off the lights and shaded the curtains before she left. The whole floor seemed to be quiet. All the patients were sleeping, but Peter couldn't. He had been sleeping all day, and now it seemed he would be awake all night. He tried to pass the time on his phone, when suddenly he lost connection to the network. As he tried to fix the issue, he started to hear laughter of a woman walking down the hallway. To his surprise, the voice was coming towards his room, and soon enough he heard footsteps coming near. Peter peered open his curtains and stared at a nurse talking to an old man who was laying across from him. Since when did they move another patient in here, or had he always been here? Peter didn't notice him before. "Don't worry, Mr. Ford. You'll be better in no time. I've informed each and every one of your family members. They'll be here to visit you tomorrow." "You called every one of them?" "Yes, sir. Everyone on the list you gave me. Now you don't need to worry about anything. Just get some rest." "Angela, I don't know how to thank you. You're like an angel to me." "Oh, Mr. Ford, this is my job." The nurse handed the man a second blanket and turned to look at Peter. Peter was surprised to see she was not only kind, she was beautiful. The nurse looked at him and smiled before she headed out again. It was only a few hours later that she was back to check the man's condition. She sat by him and joked with him while she checked his temperature. "So how are you feeling now, Mr. Ford?" "Much better, Angela. The pain in my chest has lessened." "Well, that's good news. How often have you had these heart attacks?" "They've been quite frequent, but luckily I've survived each one of them." "Oh wow, then you should know when is the worst time to have a heart attack." "Worst time? Is that something someone can predict?" "Of course, in a game of charades." The man let out a laugh. "Angela, you're a really good soul. I haven't laughed like this in a long time. I know this wasn't the first time you informed my family, but they'll never come. Mr. Ford, this isn't a place for people with no hope. This is a place where you leave with more hope than you ever had." The nurse fixed the man's IV before she left again. Peter was impressed at how well she handled her patients. He ushered the man and asked him, "She's a really good nurse, isn't she?" "Oh, you don't even know how great she is. Been in and out of this hospital for months now, and she takes care of me every time. I've never met a nurse so kind and loving like her. She makes all her patients smile in the worst of pains." "That's nice to hear. I hope you get better soon." However, the man was far from getting better. It was near dawn that the man suddenly started to have severe pain and started shouting out for help. Peter was devastated himself seeing his state. In seconds, Angela rushed to assist him. She worked patiently with him, trying to relieve his pain. Peter was amazed seeing how Angela handled the situation so easily. He couldn't help but compliment her. I admire your hard work, Nurse Angela." Angela turned around and stared at him. "Are you new here?" "Well, I'm guessing people don't come here to stay, so yes, I'm new here. It was a cliff diving accident." "Oh, so you'll be out by tomorrow probably. Thanks for the compliment, and be careful next time. You never want to be stuck here for long." Within a few hours, Peter's nurse Dorothy came in. She quietly checked what she needed to and left without a word. Peter turned to look at the man. "Now aren't you a lucky one to have a beautiful and fun nurse?" Mr. Ford chuckled. "If only I were younger, I would have asked her out, but she wouldn't have said yes anyway." "You think she'd say yes to me?" "She's too dedicated to her work. She doesn't have time for love in her life, she says." The good ones are always too good, aren't they? After the doctor visited Peter, he told him that he would be discharged in the evening. The day was going rather fine. Peter waited to see Angela again. Something about her made him happy. Well, as far as he had heard about her, she had some sort of superpower to make people happy. She dropped by later that morning and changed the man's IV bag. "These pains are unbearable, Angela. I don't know how many more days." "Don't worry, Mr. Ford. Everything will be fine." "Angela, you don't know how it feels to live like this." "Mr. Ford, I assure you the pain will be gone in no time." Peter felt quite disturbed seeing the man's state. After Angela left, his condition only seemed to get worse. He started crying in his bed, tossing from side to side. Peter wasn't sure whether he should call the nurse for him. "Mr. Ford, are you okay?" "The pain is increasing." Peter watched as the man gripped onto his chest as he tried to get off the bed. "Mr. Ford, I think you should call the nurse." Mr. Ford couldn't speak. When he started gasping for breath, his face turning red in suffocation, Peter rushed to press the call button to the front desk. "I need help here immediately. The patient next to me is having a heart attack. This is room 125. I need help." "Mr. Peter Wright? I'll send your nurse right away." In seconds, Angela rushed through the door. She saw Mr. Ford in a horrible state, crouching to the floor. She slowly helped him up and laid him down. "Angela, my time has come. I can't take this." Angela gave a smirk. "I know, Mr. Ford. It will only be a few more minutes before you will meet the peace you desired for so long." Peter furrowed her brow, seeing Angela just sitting there. "What are you doing? Call the doctors. He's dying." Angela only looked at Peter. Peter was horrified to see the grin on her face. "I know how to do my job, Mr. Peter Wright. How about you mind your own business?" "What do you mean? I'm calling the staff here right now." "There's no use of that, Peter. Look at him. He's quiet. He's finally shut that mouth of his." Angela lowered down to the man and smiled at him. "Isn't that what you always wanted, Mr. Ford?" Peter was frozen in fear and anguish at the same time. He stood there in awe, seeing the man's lifeless body now no longer moving, crying for help. "You're no angel. You're a monster." Just then, Nurse Dorothy rushed in. "Mr. Wright, what are you doing out of bed?" Peter pointed to Angela, to the man. "This cruel nurse. She let him suffer. She killed him." Dorothy looked at Peter for a minute. She then looked around the room. "Excuse me, Mr. Wright, who are you talking about? You're the only patient assigned to this room." Peter blinked his eyes. He looked at the bed. Empty. Mr. Ford was gone. Angela was gone. He was the only person in the room. He furrowed his brows. "No, how can this be? It happened in front of my eyes. It was one of the nurses. Angela." There was a sudden look of anxiety on Dorothy's face. "What did you see, Mr. Wright?" Peter explained everything to Dorothy. Dorothy widened her eyes. "This is truly unbelievable. Mr. Wright, the nurse whom you're speaking of is none other than Angela Ross. She was one of the best nurses this hospital had. She was responsible for taking care of the patients who were here for long terms. None could see through the mask she wore. She wasn't in her right mind, perhaps. Insane. She identified herself as the angel of death, but she was no angel. She was a cruel, wicked soul. She administered the patients who had been suffering for long periods of time with epinephrine. The heart stimulants she used on the patients were irretraceable, and so she had gotten away with what she did. She had fled, but after a thorough investigation had been performed on the deaths that had occurred in the hospital in the years of her working here, it was predicted that she had caused the premature demise of nearly 15 patients, assuming that she had only lessened their misery. But before the police could get to her, she fled from the hospital. The police were unable to locate her until months after, when she was found lifeless in her home. She had taken her own life. Angela Ross is no more, but the patients and other nurses still see her coming to work. Her once sweet laughter is frightening more than ever, knowing the truth behind it. Peter was shocked. His heart was still beating rapidly from what he had seen. It felt as if he were the one going through the pain. What could be more horrifying than watching the ones you trust most betray with the most wicked intentions? Click on the subscribe button and check out more awesome videos on our channel. And don't forget to press the bell icon because you know it's interesting.